Kane, Al Jazeera in Bavaria.
Well, we can speak now to Imogen Sudbury, the head of the International Rescue Committee in Brussels. Imogen, a very warm welcome to the programme. Imogen, we have another 230 or so migrants currently stranded on a ship, and we see, well, the gentleman there is saying in Germany, enough with migrants, coming to our countries. And then we have the EU, again, grappling with this problem. Why is it finding it so difficult to make progress?
Well, I think it's quite ironic that at the moment the EU leaders are finding this such a divisive issue and so difficult to come to solutions when right at the point where we see that actually numbers now arriving to Europe through the Mediterranean are at their lowest level since 2013. So what we really need politicians to do is to take a step back and to really reach agreement on a fair and efficient system for the processing of migrants arriving to Europe, which doesn't leave all the responsibility on frontline states. These numbers are quite manageable coming to Europe right now. We still see that 80% of refugees around the world are hosted in developing countries. So if the EU can't step up and show that it can actually take its fair share of responsibility within the EU, then why should we expect other countries around the world to do likewise?
So, Imogen, we've got this idea being proposed of disembarkation platforms. Is this any sort of progress in terms of some sort of attempt to get a system, as you called it?
Well, as I say, I think a system that would process refugees and asylum seekers inside Europe would be the most sensible way forward. And currently we see, we have far too many unanswered questions to be able to see whether this could either be a feasible or acceptable from a humanitarian perspective to process refugee asylum seekers outside the EU. For example, on access, how do we know who would have access to these centres? Would people have to risk their lives to get into boats in order to be rescued before they're able to have their claims processed? Secondly, legality. Would people still be taken to the nearest safe port in accordance with maritime law? And what guarantees do we have that they would actually meet the have their procedural fair due process rights respected if their claims were being processed outside the EU? Finally, on conditions, we've seen that in large-scale processing centres inside the EU, for example, on the Greek islands, we've had dangerous and overcrowded centres where it's been very hard for people to ensure humane conditions. So what kind of guarantees and confidence can we have that outside the EU conditions would be any better?
And Imogen, is one of the other challenges, something that we heard in the report there was a gentleman in it and he said, it has to be our country first, our people first, me first. And I just wonder, with this sense that people are becoming more and more concerned about migration, does that make it then harder for politicians to get some sort of a workable solution?
Well, as I say, I thoroughly understand some of the concerns that politicians are trying to address, but I think they also have a responsibility to explain that with a manageable system, migrants can also bring very positive benefits to communities. The IRC also works in a number of programs around Europe where we are working with migrants and local communities, and we see that the benefits that integration can bring and the way in which migrants can contribute to local communities. Once people are working and meeting together, they understand and see that this is a lot more manageable than some people who'd never actually come into contact with an asylum seeker in the first place.
Imogen Sudbury, the head of the International Rescue Committee in Brussels. Imogen, thank you. Now, US officials say parents who enter the country illegally with their children will not face prosecution for the time being because there's no space to house them.